Are you the mean man my mama cleans for?
Who let you in here?
Why do you keep it so dark?
Because I want it dark. Get out.
I'll be quiet. I'm just drawing.
Drawing what? You.
But not the sad part.
The sad part.
I'm doing that one last.
You're number 15. 14 have quit.
I know.
One rule.
No children in this house. I don't have any.
You brought a child into this house.
She's 6. She's quiet.
Then keep her out of his room at 7.
Why 7?
Blythe Revell did not answer her. She walked to the stairs and did not look back. Rennie stood there with her hand still on the door. Then she did what she always did. She counted. $11.37. 2 canvas bags. 72 hours. Printed on an orange notice folded twice in her back pocket. And one lie. She had said it out loud that morning to a woman who never asked her name. You already want to know why 7. Subscribe so the answer finds you. Back to that morning and the phone call. The apartment on Fell Street had one window. The window faced a wall. Rennie Talbot had lived in it 2 years. Her daughter slept on the mattress. The hot plate only worked with somebody holding the cord down. The eviction notice went up while they were at the laundromat. She peeled it off before Etta could read it. 9 agencies. 8 said no. The 9th called at 9 in the morning. Live-in placement, the woman said. Private residence. Male patient, 81, end-stage heart failure. Rennie sat down on the floor. Live in, she said. Room and board included. The Revell house out on Cardigan Lane. Room and board. 2 words that meant a roof. I should be honest with you, the woman said. 14 caregivers have left that placement in 6 months. The last one lasted 2 days. Why? He doesn't want help. He wants everyone to leave him alone so he can die. She paused. He's very good at making that happen. Etta was on the mattress with her sketchbook open. She was drawing a house with a yard. She had been drawing that same house for a year. Is there room for 2? Rennie asked. There was a pause on the line. Ms. Talbot, the contract is specific. Clause 4. No children on the property. Rennie looked at her daughter, 6 years old, in a dress that was getting short on her, drawing a yard they had never had. I don't have any, she said. The pause went on longer this time. Then you can start tomorrow. That night, she packed everything they owned into 2 bags. It did not take long. 3 shirts, 2 skirts, 1 dress with faded flowers on it. Etta would not give that one up. She said the flowers made her feel like somebody. Mama? Etta said from the mattress. Where are we going? To a big house. Like in my picture? Her mother pulled the zip shut. Bigger. Will there be a nice man there? Rennie's hands were steady. Her jaw was not. We'll find out, she said. The Revell house stood at the end of a gravel drive lined with old oaks. 3 stories of gray stone. A slate roof. 16 windows across the front. And every curtain in every one of them pulled shut. Rennie stood at the gate with a bag in each hand. Etta waited on the steps behind her, out of sight, holding her sketchbook the way other children hold a toy. The door opened before she knocked. The woman in it was in her 60s. Dark navy work dress. Iron gray hair pulled back so tight it changed the shape of her face. A pencil stub stood in her breast pocket. You're number 15, she said. 14 have quit. I know, Mrs. Dunning. I run this house. She stepped back. 1 rule. No children in this house. Rennie did not look away. I don't have any. Mrs. Dunning held her eyes a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she turned and walked into the hall. Rennie followed her across marble. A staircase curved up into the dark. Don't open any door in the basement corridor, Mrs. Dunning said. Don't move anything on his table. And when he says something to you, don't take it personally. Every one of the 14 made that mistake. She stopped outside a heavy door on the 2nd floor. She knocked twice. Nothing came back. Mr. Revell, your new caregiver. The voice that came through the wood was low and dragged. Send her in and let's get it over with. The room was dark. The curtains were drawn almost shut. One gap let a single bar of afternoon light across the floorboards. It smelled of medicine and old paper. Weston Revell sat in a wheelchair with his back to the door, facing the window, a gray blanket over his knees. A cardigan hung across his shoulders with his arms not through the sleeves. He turned the chair a quarter turn and looked at her. He was 81. The illness had taken everything off him except the frame it hung on. He looked at her uniform. He looked at her shoes. He looked at her hands last and longest. "They're sending me charity now," he said. "I'm here to help you. I don't need help, especially not yours." He turned back to the window. "You'll be gone by Thursday." "They always are. I'm not going anywhere." He made a sound that was not a laugh. Number 8 said that. She lasted 4 days. He paused. "What makes you different?" Rennie thought about the orange notice in her pocket. She thought about the child sitting on the front steps of a rich man's house with nowhere else to be. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said. "Everybody says that. Not the way I mean it." Weston Revell was quiet a long time. "The pills are on the table," he said. "Water, no ice." He did not turn around. "And if you touch the frame lying face down on that table, you're finished here." There was a picture frame beside the pill bottles. It lay flat on its face, in a clean rectangle of dust. Rennie looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then she poured the water. They were given a room in the basement, down the corridor from the laundry. Whitewashed brick, a mattress on the floor, one small window up near the ceiling with a grill across it. It was the cheapest room in a house full of expensive ones. It was theirs. And it had a door that locked. Etta walked in and turned all the way around once. "Is this ours?" "For now." "Can I put my pictures up?" Rennie looked at the brick. "Not on those walls, baby." So they did what they had always done. Etta drew. Rennie kept. Every night after the child was asleep, her mother turned the day's drawing over. She wrote a short date on the blank back of it in pencil. Then she put it in a cardboard box under the bed. She had started that in the first apartment. No refrigerator to hold them. No wall she was allowed to tape anything to. It became a habit, the way most habits start, out of not having something. "Why do you write on the back?" Etta asked once. "So I know which one is which." "They're all the same picture." "They're not," her mother said. "You just can't tell yet." The first 3 weeks were a kind of science. The bell rang at 6. The water was too warm. Then it was too cold. The porridge was too thick, and the next morning too thin. The pillows were at the wrong angle. He never raised his voice. That was the worst part. Every insult came out level and precise, like a man reading numbers off a page. "You fold towels like a child. The coffee tastes like dirt. Is that what you're used to?" I asked for silence. "Your breathing is not silence." Rennie took all of it. She took it out into the hallway and then went back in for more. Twice, she sat on the bathroom floor with the tap running. She pressed both hands over her mouth. She cried without making any sound at all. She did not quit. She could not afford to quit. And she got very good at the other job, keeping a 6-year-old invisible in a house with 16 windows. Etta learned the rules in 2 days. She learned which stairs were quiet. She learned that Mrs. Dunning went up at 10 and came down at 11. She learned to say nothing when the front door opened. "Mama," she said one night from the mattress, "how long do we have to be quiet?" "A while." "Is the man going to make us go?" Rennie put the day's drawing in the box. "No, because I could be quieter." Her mother pushed the box back under the bed with one foot. "You're quiet enough," she said. "You're the quietest person I ever met." Etta thought about that. "When we get our own house," she said, "I want a wall. A wall. A big one. For the pictures." Rennie sat down on the edge of the mattress. She did not say anything for a while. There was nothing to say that would still be true in the morning. "Okay," she said finally. "A wall." It happened on a Tuesday in the 3rd week. It happened because 6-year-olds do not stay where they are put. Rennie was in the laundry. The door of the 2nd-floor room had been left ajar to move some air through it. Etta came up the quiet stairs. She stopped in the doorway. She looked into a room with all its curtains. shut in the middle of the afternoon. Then she walked in. Weston Revell did not hear her until she was standing beside the wheelchair. "Are you the mean man my mama cleans for?" He turned so fast the chair moved under him. A small girl in a faded dress with flowers on it, 2 braids, a crayon mark on one cheek, a sketchbook under her arm. "Who let you in here? Why do you keep it so dark?" "Because I want it dark." "Get out." She did not get out. She sat straight down on the floorboards, an arm's length from his chair. She opened the sketchbook across her knees. She started to draw. "I'll be quiet. I'm just drawing." He stared at her. 14 adults had broken on this man. 14 grown women had gone out that door, with their coats half on. This one had sat down on his floor and taken the lid off a crayon. "Drawing what?" "You." But not the sad part. His mouth opened, and nothing came out of it. "The sad part," he said. "I'm doing that one last." She drew for 20 minutes. She did not say another word. Neither did he. He did not ring the bell. He did not call down the stairs. He sat in a dark room with a child on his floor and watched a crayon move. When she was finished, she tore the page out and held it up. 2 figures. A stick man in a chair with wheels. A smaller one beside him with triangles for braids. Above them both, a yellow sun with lines coming out in every direction. "That's you," she said. "And that's me." His hand came out from under the blanket and took the paper. The hand was not steady. He looked at it a long time. He did not tear it up. He put it down on the blanket over his knees. He turned back toward the window. His right hand went into the cardigan pocket and closed around something small. His thumb began to move over it, around and around, the way it did when he was thinking. Downstairs, Rennie came out of the laundry. She counted the seconds it took to understand that the basement was too quiet. Then she went up the stairs, 2 at a time. She stopped in the doorway. Her daughter was sitting on the floor of a dying man's bedroom. The dying man was looking out of a window with a crayon drawing on his knees. "Mr. Revell." "She stays," he said. Rennie did not move. "I'm sorry. I'll take her down, and it won't happen again." "She stays." He still did not turn around. "And you will not tell that woman in the navy dress that she was ever in this room." "Why?" "Because there is a clause in your contract." "You wrote the contract." "Yes," he said. "I did." Then, after a moment, in a voice with nothing sharp left in it, "Take the child down and feed her. She's been on that floor an hour." After that, Etta came up every day. She told him about the caterpillar book she had read 6 times. She told him about a boy who took her eraser. She told him the oak outside the window was older than everyone in the house put together. She had decided that on her own and would not be argued out of it. Weston Revell answered maybe 1 sentence in 10. He stopped telling her to leave. On the Friday, she asked him why there were no pictures on his walls. He did not answer that one. "My mama puts mine in a box," Etta said. "She says a house with pictures in it is a house with love in it." She looked around at the bare walls. "Ours is in a box, so I don't know what that means." His jaw moved. His thumb went around the thing in his pocket. By the end of that week, he was eating solid food again. By the end of the next, he wanted. The curtains opened 4 inches in the mornings. That was not the same as opening them. It was not nothing either. Mrs. Dunning passed the door one afternoon and stopped. A child on the floor and an old man reading in the same room. She walked on without a word. Then, on a Thursday evening, a car came up the gravel. Blythe Revell was 44 and married to the eldest son. She arrived in a camel coat with a slim steel case in her hand. She was kind to everyone. She was kind to Mrs. Dunning at the door. She was kind to Rennie on the stairs. She went up, fluffed the pillows, poured the water, and put the evening pills into her father-in-law's palm, 1 at a time. "There you go, Dad," she said. "Your evening medicine." It should have been a good thing. From the doorway, it looked exactly like one. Here is what nobody in that house knew yet. Weston Revell's cardiac prescription was 20 milligrams. It had been 20 for 3 years. The tablets in the steel case were 5. They had been 5 since the second Thursday in October. And in the bottom of the case, there was a second bottle with no label on it at all. Everything after this turned on that case. Rennie carried the water glass down to the kitchen and did not think about it once. There was no reason to. A rich man's family had come to visit. That was all it was. Upstairs, Etta was drawing the table beside the bed. It was what she could see from the floor. 3 bottles and a glass of water. She used the white crayon for the pills. She looked up. Mr. Revell. The ladies' ones are a different white. He did not look down. Everything is a different white to you, he said. No. She held the drawing up. Then she put it down again, because he was not looking. Yours are white. Hers are the other white. What other white? The cloud one. There is one white, he said. There's 6. She went back to the paper. I have them in the box at home. Draw the window. So she drew the window. The change came slowly enough to be explained away. The first week of the visits, he slept 9 hours. The second, he slept 12. His color went back to the gray it had been in the summer. His hands shook worse in the mornings. One afternoon, he put a book down on the blanket. 20 minutes later, he could not remember picking it up. Mrs. Dunning said it was the season turning. Dr. Perrin said 81-year-old hearts do this. Blythe said it twice, gently, standing in the hall with her coat still on. He's been declining since spring, she said. We have to be realistic. Rennie wrote the numbers down anyway. Writing things down was the only thing she had ever been able to afford. Hours slept. What he ate. What time the trimmer started. Blythe came on Tuesdays and Thursdays now. Then on Sundays as well. She brought a slim folder with her. After the pills, she would put it on the blanket and turn the pages for him, one at a time. She said the same sentence in the same warm voice. Just here, Dad. And this one. That's the last one. What is it? He said one evening. Restructuring. Grant's had the lawyers on it for months. Sly drew this? Sly's semi-retired now. It's a bigger firm. He signed. His signature that evening was not the one on the wall. Downstairs, under the photograph of a groundbreaking. It was not close. Twice that fortnight Rennie found the child, sitting in the upstairs hallway instead of the room. He's asleep, Etta said. He's asleep a lot now. He's tired, baby. He wasn't tired before the lady came. Children say things like that. They say them because they have not learned yet which observations are allowed. Rennie stood in that hallway with a laundry basket on her hip. Something moved in her that she had no name for and nowhere to take. She was a caregiver, no training, no standing, and a lie about her own daughter under everything she said in that house. So she did the only thing she could. She kept watching. She kept counting. On the last Sunday in October, Blythe stopped her in the upstairs hall. You've been with him 10 weeks now. 11. He talks to you. She smiled. He doesn't talk to Grant. He talks to my... Rennie stopped. He talks when he wants to. Blythe's eyes went over her face, unhurried, the way a person reads a receipt. Miss Talbot, she said, when it comes, it's going to come fast. Everyone's going to have a great deal to do. The smile did not move. It would be a mercy if you didn't make it complicated. Then she went down the stairs. Her heels were very loud on the marble. Rennie stood in the dark with a basket on her hip. She had just been told something. She simply could not have said what. The storm came in off the lake on the first Friday in November. It put the whole county in the dark by 10 at night. Wind at 70 miles an hour. A transformer went somewhere past the gate, and the house dropped into black. The generator ran 30 seconds and died. At 2 in the morning, Rennie heard something come down upstairs. She went up barefoot with a phone light in her hand. She found him on the floor beside the wheelchair, one hand at his chest, his face the color of the wall behind him. The monitor was dead. The call system was dead. His breath came in short pieces that did not add up to breathing. She put the phone down with the light pointing at the ceiling. Then she went down on her knees beside him. She tilted his head back. She put the heel of her hand on the center of his chest. She started counting out loud because that was the only thing her hands knew how to do under pressure. 1, 2, 3, 4. His ribs were nothing under her palms. Stay with me. Stay with me, Mr. Ravel. She got a rhythm. She held it. Between rounds, she grabbed the phone and called the numbers taped inside the medicine cabinet. Grant, voicemail. Blythe, voicemail. Teddy, voicemail. She called for an ambulance. A recording told her all lines in her area were busy. Half the county was underwater. She made the decision in about 2 seconds. She got her arm under him and brought him up off the floor. He weighed almost nothing. She carried him down that curving staircase in the dark. Etta was at the bottom, dressed, shoes on, sketchbook against her chest. Not crying. Get in the car, baby. Now. The Honda was 9 years old, and the wipers had 1 speed. Rennie drove 40 minutes through water she could not see the bottom of. Weston Ravel lay across the back seat. Etta sat beside him, with both hands around his hand. "It's okay, Mr. Ravel," she said. "My mom is a really good driver." He did not answer. "She drives at night for work," Etta said. "She's not even scared." At the hospital, a doctor came out into a corridor lit like an operating theater. He looked at a woman soaked to the skin in a gray uniform. 5 more minutes, he said, and we'd have lost him. Rennie leaned against the wall. She slid down it until she was sitting on the floor. She pulled her daughter into her lap. Her hands would not stop shaking. Etta reached up and put a palm flat on her mother's cheek. "You saved him," she said. Rennie kissed the top of her head. Her braids smelled like rain. In the unit, sometime before morning, Weston Ravel opened his eyes. The room was white and bright, the opposite of every room he owned. Through the glass, he could see a hallway. On the floor of the hallway sat a woman in a wet uniform with a sleeping child across her knees. He looked at her a long time. "You look like somebody," he said. He said it to nobody, too quietly for the machine beside him to care. He was in the hospital 4 nights. Rennie and Etta slept in the waiting room, on 2 plastic chairs pushed together. The family came on the 2nd day. Grant came first, in a suit with no rain on it. He went past the plastic chairs without looking at them. His first question at the nurse's station was not about his father's heart. It was about power of attorney. Teddy came in the afternoon with his phone in his hand. He stood at the window for 11 minutes, then went for coffee and did not come back. Blythe looked at the woman in the wrinkled uniform and the child with her braids coming loose. She leaned toward her husband and said something. They both looked over. It was the way people look at a chair left in the wrong room. Through the glass, Rennie could see all 3 of them. Nobody was holding his hand. Etta watched them from the plastic chair. "Mama. Why aren't they touching him?" "I don't know, baby." Now, before we go on, if you're still with me, do me one small thing. Tell me in the comments what time it is where you are. I like knowing who's out there in the dark. All right. Back to the 4th night and the ride home. Mrs. Dunning drove. Grant had already left for a meeting. Nobody spoke for 40 minutes. That evening, Weston called Rennie into his room. He looked worse than he had before the storm. Something behind his eyes had moved. "Sit down," he said. It was the first time in 11 weeks he had offered her a chair. He opened the drawer of the table and took out a checkbook. He uncapped a pen. "Name it," he said. "No, thank you." The pen stopped over the paper. "You misunderstand me. I'm asking what number." "I understood you. Everyone has a number." "I have a roof," Rennie said. "You gave me that when you gave me the job." Weston Ravel put the pen down very slowly. It was the way a man puts down something he has just found out is not the tool he needs. He looked at her the way he had looked at the drawing on his knees, like a thing that would not resolve. Then he turned the chair toward the window and said nothing for a long while. "My children want the company," he said at last. "My lawyers want the retainer. My doctors want the insurance." He stopped. "You wanted a roof for a child you told this house you didn't have." Rennie's blood went cold in her hands. "Mr. Ravel, 14 people have been paid to be in this room with me." He turned his head. "You were the first one in 50 years who wanted me to still be in it." 3 days after he came home, he asked her to take him downstairs. Not the kitchen, The basement corridor, past the laundry, to the last door on the left. The one Mrs. Dunning had named on the first afternoon. It had sounded like a rule. It had been a warning. He took a key out of the cardigan pocket. His hand shook so badly it took 3 tries to find the lock. The room was small and airless and had no window. Whitewashed brick, a board floor, lagged laundry pipes running across the low ceiling. There was a plain wooden chest of drawers, a rocking chair with a faded cushion, dust a 1/4 of an inch thick on everything. Above the drawers hung one photograph in a dark wooden frame. A young woman in a plain dark dress and a white half-apron, standing on the back step of somebody else's house, laughing at whoever held the camera. Her hair was pinned at the nape. Her hands were too big for the rest of her, and worn out at 28. On the middle finger of her right hand, there was a small brass thimble. Weston Revell looked at her so long that Rennie thought he had fallen asleep. Her name was Opal, he said. His voice had changed. It was not sharp, and it was not cold. It was the sound something makes when it has been held together, too tightly, for too long. She was my mother. Rennie did not move. I was born in 1945, in a house on the other side of this state that I have never once driven past. He stopped. My mother was live-in help. She cleaned it and cooked in it and raised the children in it. His thumb was moving in his pocket. The eldest son of that family was my father. He never married her. He never acknowledged me. And they put her out, Rennie said. No, that is the part nobody believes. He looked up at the photograph. They kept her. The pipes ticked overhead. The employment contract in that house had 4 clauses. The 4th one said, no children on the property. Rennie felt the floor go strange under her. So she kept me in the room beside the laundry, Weston said. I lived there until I was 9. I did not go upstairs in the daytime. Nobody in that family ever said out loud that I existed. He put his hand flat on the arm of the chair. There was a ledger in the kitchen with the staff wages in it. Every woman had a line. He said the next part carefully, as though the words were sharp at both ends. My mother's line did not have her name on it. It said girl number 4. He took his hand out of his pocket and opened it. A small brass thimble lay in his palm, worn thin on one side. She sewed at night for the money, he said. I left at 18. I changed my name to one that sounded like it came from somewhere. I built everything I have. And I never told a living person where I came from. Not my wives. Not my sons. He turned the chair. For the first time since she had walked into his house, he looked directly at her. Every caregiving contract I have signed for 15 years has had a clause 4 in it, he said. I wrote it myself. I copied it out of the only contract I ever read as a boy, word for word. And I never once let myself understand what I was doing. The room was very quiet. You broke it on the first afternoon, he said. You stood in my hall and lied to Dunning's face. I have known since the 3rd week. Then why did you let us stay? Because she sat down on the floor. That's not a reason. It is the only one I have, he said. And it took me 60 years to get it. It happened on a Thursday. It happened because Blythe Revell left her case in the bathroom. Rennie found it on the vanity counter after the car had gone down the drive. She picked it up to move it. The lid came open in her hand. 2 bottles rolled against each other inside. The first had his name printed on it. The right drug. The wrong number. 5 milligrams where it should have said 20. The second bottle had no label at all. She stood there a long time with the case open in her hands. She had been giving him his morning tablets for 11 weeks. She had counted 20 milligrams onto her own palm 150 times. These were smaller. These were the other white. She thought about putting it back. She thought about her daughter asleep, 2 floors down, in a room they did not pay for. If she said this out loud and could not prove it, they would be on the road by morning, and she would have done it to them herself. Then she took out her phone with its cracked screen and photographed both bottles. She put the case back exactly where it had been. Blythe came for it the next morning. She went into the bathroom. She zipped the case shut. Then she came down to the kitchen, where Rennie was standing over a pan of oatmeal, and closed the door behind her. You went through my things. You left them in the bathroom. You opened it. Rennie turned around. Those aren't his tablets, Mrs. Revell. The pleasant thing went out of Blythe's face all at once, like a light going off in a window. Your staff, she said. You can barely read a label. I've read that label 300 times. Then read this one. Blythe took a phone out of her coat pocket and turned the screen around. Fell Street. 72-hour notice. She let that sit. And an employment contract you signed in September. No children on this property. The oatmeal was burning. Neither of them moved to take it off. One call to the agency and you're not placed in this state again, Blythe said. One call to the county and somebody comes to look at, or you've got that little girl sleeping. Take my phone if you want it, Rennie said. I've already sent them. That was a lie. It was the second one she had told in that house. It cost her more than the first. Blythe put out her hand. Rennie put the cracked phone into it. You'll get this back on Monday, Blythe said. At the gate, behind them, the kitchen door stood open 4 inches. Etta was in it with her sketchbook against her chest. She had heard all of it. By the time Rennie got downstairs, the box had been pulled out from under the bed, into the middle of the floor. Her daughter sat beside it with her hands in her lap. Mama, she said, is the pretty lady making us leave? Rennie went down on her knees and put both arms around her. She did not answer. For the first time in 11 weeks, she did not know. Rennie sat on the basement floor that night, with the box in front of her, and nothing else left. No phone, no photographs, no standing. 3 days to be out of a house she had lied her way into, against a family with a firm on retainer. She started taking the drawings out because her hands needed something to do. 91 of them. 11 weeks of a child drawing the only room she was allowed to sit in. And on the back of every single one, in pencil, in her own handwriting, a date. She laid them out on the concrete in order. The window, the blanket with the fringe, the chair, the same crooked stick man over and over, getting a little better at being a man each time. And on the table beside him, in almost every one, 3 bottles and a glass of water. She had gone through 40 before her hands stopped. Etta had drawn the pills. For the first 5 weeks, they were white. The white crayon pressed hard, the way a 6-year-old does white. Partway through the stack, they were not. They were the pale gray one, the crayon Etta called Cloud. After that day, they were cloud in every single drawing. Rennie turned that page over. October the 14th. She sat back on her heels and understood what she was holding. It was not a photograph. It was not a witness statement. It was better than either. 91 dated records made as it happened by somebody with no interest in the outcome. Somebody who had reached for a different crayon on a particular Tuesday, because on that Tuesday, the tablets stopped being the same color. At 2:30, she went upstairs. She knocked once and did not wait to be told to come in. Weston Revell was awake. He was awake most nights now. You're leaving on Monday, he said. Yes. I have not agreed to that. It isn't your decision anymore. She came to the side of the bed. I need you to listen to me for 1 minute. She put the drawings down on the blanket over his knees, in order. Then she talked him through them, the way she had counted out loud on his bedroom floor. Steady. Numbered. He did not interrupt once. When she got to the 14th of October, he put his hand flat on the paper and held it there. Call Perrin, he said. It's 2:30. Call him at his house. The number is in the drawer. She dialed from the phone beside his bed. It rang 6 times. Dr. Perrin. My name is Rennie Talbot. I'm Mr. Revell's caregiver. It is 2:45. I know. His medication has been substituted. There was a silence with something impatient in it. And you're a medical professional. No. I'm his maid. She kept her voice level. I have 11 weeks of dated records of what has been on his bedside table. The color changes on the 14th of October. Records kept by who? Rennie looked down at a stick man in a chair with wheels, under a yellow sun, drawn by somebody asleep 2 floors below. By a 6-year-old, she said, who does not know what a milligram is. The line stayed quiet. Order the bloods, doctor. You can do it in the morning, or you can do it at his funeral. A long moment went by. I'll have a nurse there at 8, Dr. Perrin said. The bloods came back on Saturday afternoon. His cardiac levels were at 1/3 of therapeutic range. There was also a mild sedative in him. No doctor had prescribed it. No pharmacy had dispensed it. Dr. Perrin did not call the family. He called the county prosecutor's office because the law required it of him. By 4 o'clock, there were 2 investigators in the study and a recorder on the desk. Blythe Revell arrived at 5:30 with a lawyer. She was very calm. She said the word misunderstanding 4 times in the first 10 minutes. A distressed employee facing eviction had made an allegation. The employee had been caught going through her private property. There was a signed contract this woman had broken on her first day. There is a child living in that basement, she said. That child is not supposed to be in this house at all. Ask her about Clause 4. The room went quiet. It was the particular quiet that follows the strongest thing anyone has said, and that was when the door opened. Mrs. Dunning pushed the chair in. Weston Revell came into his own study for the first time in 2 years. Clean shirt, cardigan across his shoulders, 91 sheets of paper on his knees. Clause 4 is mine, he said. I wrote it. Ask me about it instead. Dad, sit down, Blythe. He turned to the 2 investigators. He was 81, and his voice was not loud. My name at birth was Weston Kessel. My mother was Opal Kestel. He stopped and made himself go on. She was live-in domestic help in a house in this state from 1943. I was her son by the eldest son of that family. I was not acknowledged. Nobody in the room moved. I was raised in the room beside their laundry. Their contract said there could be no children on the property. He put his hand down on the drawings. That is where Clause 4 comes from. I copied it out. For 15 years, I have been enforcing the sentence that erased me on other people's children. He let that stand. My daughter-in-law has known this since the summer. She found the ledger in the second drawer of that desk. She has been asking me to sign things at 7 in the evening ever since. He looked at the recorder, and I have signed them. Because at 7 in the evening, for 6 weeks, I have not been able to read them. The lawyer began to say something. She is going to tell you that I am confused, Weston said. Write down that I said it before you asked. It took the county 19 weeks. Weston Revell did not do any of it. He gave a statement and went back upstairs. The records and the blood work and 91 dated sheets of paper went where they were supposed to go. Other people carried it from there. Blythe Revell was charged in the spring. Grant was not. He had signed nothing and known nothing. The not knowing was its own sentence, and he served it in front of everyone. That evening, Rennie found the old man by the window with the curtains still open. You could have kept it, she said. About your mother. Nobody was ever going to make you say it. She was going to make me sign until it finished me. That isn't why you said it. Weston Revell looked out at a dark lawn. No, he said. I said it because a 6-year-old asked me why I was so sad. He turned the thimble over in his fingers. I have been sad for 81 years, and I could not answer her without saying my mother's name out loud. That took something. It took nothing. He shook his head once. A thing can only be used against you while you are still hiding it. That is not courage. That is arithmetic. He did 3 things that winter. None of them cost him very much money. The first was a sentence. Emery Sly came out to the house with the standing caregiving contract. Weston Revell had him strike Clause 4 out of it, then out of the agency's template, then out of every copy the estate held. Replace it with what? Sly asked. Nothing. Leave the space. The second was a name. It took 4 months and a records clerk 2 counties away. At the end, there was a corrected line in a register where there had never been one. The line said Opal Kestel. Beside it, in a column empty since 1945, it said the name of her son. The third was a wall. Etta Talbot got the upstairs hallway, between the 3rd door and the 4th. 14 clean rectangles had been sitting on that wallpaper for 60 years. Mrs. Dunning found the hooks still in place. Where do you want the first one? She asked. Etta pointed at the middle. 1 year later, the curtains in that house were open. All of them. There were photographs on the wall now. A young woman in a white half-apron laughing on somebody else's back step. The same woman, older, in front of a garden she had planted herself. And between them, taped up with one strip going yellow at the edges, a stick man in a chair with wheels. A smaller figure beside him, a yellow sun. Rennie Talbot ran the day staff at Revell House. She had a cottage at the east end of the property, in her name, not alone. She still counted things. She had not been able to stop. On a Tuesday afternoon, Weston Revell sat out on the back porch, in a patch of sun, a blanket over his knees. A 7-year-old sat on the step below him, reading out loud and getting stuck on the long words. "Say it again," he said, deliberately. Again, deliberately. She looked up. "That's what you were, at the start." "Yes." "You're not anymore." "No," he said. "I'm not. Now let me ask you something. If you had been standing in that hall with 2 bags and 72 hours, would you have told the truth? Tell me down in the comments. I read every one. Rest easy now. There will be another one waiting the next time you come this way.